The night had already swallowed the sky when he returned from the trail, still panting, still trying to understand what had just happened. Have you ever felt that kind of fear that doesn't make sense but crawls under your skin like an invisible touch? That's how he described it. As he walked through the forest, something broke the darkness. A light, but not just any light. It was a perfect triangle, floating among the trees, as if it had been sculpted into the very fabric of the night. The glow didn't flicker, didn't waver, it simply existed, imposing and wrong. Horror infiltrated without permission, a shiver crawling up his spine to the nape of his neck. He wasn't alone. The friend who was with him held his breath as he saw him frozen, his eyes wide, reflecting the same light. For a moment, neither of them moved. Time seemed to shatter, turning each second into an eternity. The wind that had been blowing through the leaves suddenly fell silent, and the entire world seemed to hold its breath along with them. Instinct screamed to run, but their legs wouldn't obey. The fear wasn't ordinary, it was something deeper, primitive. Then, as if obeying an invisible command, the light simply disappeared. Just like that. As if it had never been there. But it had been. They knew that. The walk back was made in silence, their steps echoing on the dry earth. Neither of them looked at the other, as if any mention of what they'd seen could give form to the terror and bring it back. The shadows seemed denser, as if something were lurking in them. When they finally left the trail, the relief was immediate but brief. Something didn't feel right. Something had followed them there. But he didn't realize it until later. Much later. Hours later, when they finally separated to sleep, the silence of the night didn't bring rest. He returned alone to his room, but the feeling of being watched never left him. Have you ever had that impression that someone is watching you, but when you look, there's nothing there? That's exactly what it was. Except this time there was something. He didn't want to look back, but the air grew heavy, cold, as if something was draining the warmth from the room. And then he saw it. In the reflection of the window, right behind him, a silhouette. Not a blurry shape, not a play of shadows, but something real. Something that shouldn't have been there. He turned around so quickly he nearly stumbled, his heart pounding in his chest. But the room was empty. Yet the feeling remained. The fear, that irrational fear, slithered inside him like poison. He threw himself onto the bed, trying to convince himself it was just his imagination, that he was merely suggestible from what had happened in the forest. But how could he explain the breathing he heard at the foot of the bed? How could he justify the soft footsteps on the floorboards right there where there was no one? He squeezed his eyes shut, wishing sleep would claim him. But sleep didn't come. And then, when the silence finally seemed to overpower him, something happened. A low, dragging sound like nails scraping against wood. It came from outside. The same direction he had come from. As if it had been waiting. As if it had never truly left. The sun rose, but the daylight didn't dissipate what he felt. Breakfast was consumed between uneasy glances and unspoken words. His friend, pale and silent, absently stirred his food, unable to pretend things were normal. Then came the information he hadn't expected. The woman of the house sat at the table with a worried expression, mentioning that she had tried to contact them during the night. She said she had seen something strange outside, movements where no one should have been. But the calls had failed, and when she tried to get closer, something stopped her from getting too near. His blood ran cold. The woman told them she had heard sounds near the house, but when she tried to get a response, everything remained in suffocating silence. He exchanged a glance with his friend, and it was as if everything fell into place, and at the same time unraveled. If she had been outside and they never heard anything, then who, or what, had been there? A shiver ran down his spine as he recalled the oppressive feeling that had overtaken the room the night before, the invisible weight in the air, the shadows that seemed to shift in the dark. It wasn't just an impression. Something had really surrounded them that night. The friend dropped his utensils with a dry clatter, his hands trembling. The woman seemed hesitant, as if she'd rather not know the details of what had happened. But now they knew. Something had been there, watching, lurking, waiting. The question that mattered now was another. Had it really gone away? And as the day faded, bringing with it a weaker sun, a sense of unease grew with each passing minute. They tried to convince themselves it had all been a series of coincidences, a collection of fears fueled by the unknown. But the shadows were still there, invisible, waiting. The house no longer felt as safe as before, and the walls, once simple, seemed to close in as if they were breathing. One last question hung in the air. What hides in the shadows, still watching, waiting for the right moment to appear? Would everything return to normal if they went back to the trail? Or would the next night bring something even more terrifying, more insidious? They knew they were being followed. But the fear was in every corner, not just in the shadows but inside them too. Because somewhere in that silence, something was watching them. Something was waiting. And as the darkness spread across the horizon, the only certainty was a suffocating feeling. They were no longer alone. If you were in their shoes, could you go back? Or would the shadows already be waiting for you too? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Terrifying stories like this are just beginning, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.